Many sincere believers love God deeply and genuinely want to grow. They pray with tears, fast with discipline, attend church faithfully, and serve with all their hearts. Yet, despite all this effort, their spiritual life still feels stuck. They keep asking, why isn't anything changing? The frustration grows because the effort is real, but the results seem missing. The truth is, the spiritual realm doesn't respond to sincerity alone. It responds to laws. Just like gravity doesn't care how good your intentions are, spiritual principles work the same way, whether you understand them or not. When these principles are ignored or misunderstood, spiritual life feels confusing and inconsistent. But when they are understood and applied, results become steady and predictable. One of the hardest truths to accept is that ignorance can quietly limit destiny. The Bible doesn't say this to condemn anyone, but to reveal a reality. Knowledge is the gateway to dominion. Many things we call spiritual attacks are actually the consequences of missing understanding. When light comes, confusion leaves. What once felt difficult suddenly becomes simple. In the spirit realm, light is more than information, it's revelation. And revelation gives access, confidence, and authority. Spiritual authority is not about how long someone has been saved or how loud they pray. It is built on understanding. The more truth you genuinely grasp and live by, the more authority you carry. This is why two believers can pray about the same issue with equal sincerity, yet experience very different outcomes. The spirit realm does not respond to titles, positions, or emotions. It responds to alignment. What you understand deeply and practice consistently is what responds to you. God's laws are not selective, emotional, or biased. They work the same way for everyone. Just as seeds grow for anyone who plants them correctly, spiritual principles produce results for anyone who applies them properly. This is actually a reflection of God's faithfulness. His consistency is revealed in the reliability of His laws. When a believer aligns with them, results don't have to be forced. They happen naturally. Spiritual growth then is not something that happens automatically with time. Years in church do not equal maturity. Understanding does. Growth requires intention, humility, discipline, and a willingness to submit to truth. Without these, people can remain spiritually stagnant for years while assuming they are mature simply because time has passed. True growth shows itself through inner transformation, emotional stability, spiritual fruit, and consistent character. Before anything changes visibly in life, something must first shift inwardly. Alignment always comes before manifestation. When beliefs, actions, and understanding come into agreement with God's principles, results become unavoidable. Breakthrough is not something you chase. It's something that flows naturally from correct spiritual positioning. When alignment is right, struggle decreases, clarity increases, and progress becomes steady. What once felt like a mystery begins to make sense, not because God changed, but because understanding finally arrived. Many people approach their spiritual lives the same way they approach their emotions. They believe that if they feel things deeply enough, if they cry harder, pray longer, fast more intensely, or push themselves further, then something has to change. The assumption is simple: strong feelings should produce strong results. But over time, this way of living becomes exhausting because the results don't always match the effort. The truth is, the spiritual realm doesn't run on emotions. It isn't moved by intensity or passion alone. It is orderly, structured, and governed by laws established by God. Emotions can be part of spiritual moments. They can even be beautiful, but they are not what creates authority or produces outcomes. When someone builds their spiritual life on feelings, their results will always be inconsistent because emotions rise and fall. God's laws do not. Think about how natural laws work. Gravity doesn't respond because someone really wants it to. It responds to alignment. Whether a person understands it or not, the law still functions the same way. In the same way, the spirit realm responds to obedience, understanding, and correct positioning, not desperation or emotional intensity. This is why two people can pray the same prayer with the same passion and see completely different results. It's not that God favored one over the other. It's that one was aligned with the principles that govern spiritual outcomes. Sincerity matters, but sincerity alone is not enough. A person can be honest, genuine, and deeply committed and still be operating in misunderstanding. The spirit realm honors truth, not intention. This is why so much effort can sometimes lead to so little fruit. Without understanding how prayer works, how faith functions, how authority is exercised, and how spiritual growth actually happens, people burn energy but see little change. But when understanding enters the picture, everything shifts. Confusion fades, struggle eases. What once felt draining begins to feel effective. God designed His system to be consistent. That consistency isn't restrictive, it's merciful. It means believers don't have to guess, hope blindly, or rely on emotional highs. When the right principles are applied, the right results follow. Confidence replaces uncertainty because spiritual life stops being unpredictable. A believer who understands spiritual laws doesn't merely wish for results, they live with expectation. When emotions are put in their proper place, they become healthy and powerful. Passion becomes strength when it rests on understanding. Prayer becomes fruitful when it is guided by truth. Faith becomes steady when it is rooted in knowledge instead of feeling. The moment a believer shifts from depending on emotions to walking in alignment, spiritual life changes. Frustration gives way to consistency. Results stop being rare moments and start becoming a dependable pattern. And that's when spiritual life finally feels the way it was always meant to feel: stable, clear, and fruitful. Many believers struggle far more than they need to, not because they lack passion or commitment, but because they underestimate how important understanding really is. They assume that if they love God deeply enough, pray hard enough, or stay devoted long enough, everything will eventually work out. But the spiritual realm doesn't respond to effort without light. Devotion is powerful, but devotion without understanding often leads to exhaustion. Knowledge isn't an optional upgrade in the life of faith, it's essential. Without it, people are left guessing. They move through spiritual life by trial and error, trying to interpret experiences without clarity. When things don't work, they often blame attacks, opposition, or circumstances, without realizing that the real issue may simply be a gap in understanding. Ignorance rarely shows up as obvious ignorance. It usually shows up as delayed confusion, or the same problems happening over and over again. People pray intensely about issues that knowledge would have already solved. They fight battles that understanding would have prevented in the first place. Many of the limits people blame on the enemy are actually the result of missing truth. When light comes, resistance weakens. Clarity brings authority. The moment someone truly understands how something works in God's system, fear loses its grip and confidence begins to grow. Knowledge gives access in the spirit realm. It determines what a person can handle, what they can sustain, and how far they can go. Without understanding, even good things can become heavy burdens. Opportunities show up, blessings arrive, but the capacity to manage them isn't there yet. This is why some people rise quickly and fall just as fast. Knowledge creates stability. It provides structure, wisdom, and discernment, protecting destiny from unnecessary damage. Spiritual power is deeply connected to understanding. Authority isn't random. It flows in proportion to light. What a believer truly understands becomes what they can confidently handle and command. As understanding grows, effectiveness grows with it. Prayer becomes clearer. Faith becomes thoughtful instead of emotional. Decisions become aligned instead of reactive. Knowledge replaces superstition with confidence rooted in truth. God's mercy does not cancel His principles. His love does not override His laws. Grace gives access to God, but understanding determines how life works within His system. This isn't harsh, it's faithful. It means that anyone who is willing to learn can grow, advance, and experience victory. When believers commit to learning, they move from merely surviving to walking with mastery, from confusion to clarity, and from limitation to a life marked by consistency, strength, and spiritual advantage. And that is when faith stops feeling frustrating and starts becoming fruitful. In the spiritual world, authority doesn't come from age, titles, visibility, or how long someone has been known as a believer. It comes from understanding. What a person truly understands becomes the measure of how much influence they carry. This is why two people can believe the same things, attend the same church, and even use the same language of faith, yet operate on completely different levels. The difference isn't effort, it's light. The spirit realm responds to understanding because understanding means alignment with truth. Where there is little clarity, there is little authority. But as light increases, authority grows naturally. Not because someone is trying harder, but because truth has taken root inside them. Many people think authority is something God hands out randomly. But authority is actually something that flows through revelation. When truth becomes clear, confidence replaces hesitation. Fear fades. Confusion lifts. A believer who understands spiritual realities doesn't beg endlessly or struggle unnecessarily. They act from a place of knowing. And that knowing is what the spirit realm recognizes. Words spoken without understanding feel empty, but words spoken from revelation carry weight. This is why repeated religious activity doesn't always produce real spiritual results. Actions done without understanding may look impressive on the outside, but they lack authority. The spirit realm doesn't respond to volume, repetition, or intensity. It responds to truth. Authority isn't loud. It's accurate. It doesn't strive or force outcomes. It enforces what has already been established through understanding. As light increases, responsibility increases too. Greater understanding opens the door to deeper levels of spiritual engagement. This is why growth often comes with new challenges. Not because something is wrong, but because authority attracts responsibility. The spirit realm recognizes growth and responds accordingly. Without sufficient understanding, someone may desire authority, but struggle to carry it well. Knowledge prepares a person on the inside before authority shows up on the outside. This connection between authority and understanding also protects the heart from pride. When authority is rooted in truth, it can never be credited to ego. The more light a believer receives, the more dependent they become on truth, not emotions, assumptions, or appearances. Authority grounded in understanding produces humility, stability, and consistency. It doesn't collapse under pressure because it isn't built on circumstances. In the end, spiritual authority is not something to chase. It's something that emerges. As understanding deepens, authority follows naturally. When truth becomes internalized, it shapes how a person speaks, chooses, and acts. The spirit realm responds to this alignment because light carries legitimacy. What a believer truly understands becomes what they are empowered to enforce. And in that understanding, authority finds both its voice and its strength. One of the most misunderstood ideas in spiritual life is the belief that spiritual principles somehow favor certain people. Many assume that results are reserved for a special group, those with the right background, the right calling, or the right history. But spiritual laws don't work that way. They are not impressed by titles, reputation, or past experiences. Just like natural laws, they work the same for everyone. This consistency doesn't show God's distance. It reveals His fairness and reliability. Because spiritual laws are predictable, they remove a lot of the uncertainty people feel in their spiritual walk. When the right principles are applied correctly, results follow. Not sometimes, consistently. This is why some people grow steadily and bear fruit over time, while others remain stuck despite years of effort. The difference isn't God's love or willingness. It's understanding and application. Spiritual laws don't respond to desire alone, they respond to alignment. When alignment is right, results aren't optional, they're inevitable. This truth can feel both comforting and uncomfortable. It's comforting because it means anyone, no matter where they start, can grow, move forward, and experience real change. But it's also challenging because it removes excuses. When things don't work, we can't always blame circumstances, opposition, or other people. Instead, we're invited to look inward and ask whether we're applying the right principles in the right way. Responsibility replaces guessing, and growth becomes intentional rather than accidental. The impartial nature of spiritual laws also explains why inconsistency produces unstable results. Partial obedience leads to partial outcomes. When principles are treated casually, results become unpredictable. Spiritual laws don't demand perfection, but they do require respect. When believers engage them with consistency and intention, their spiritual lives gain direction, balance, and stability. God's faithfulness is revealed through the reliability of His system. He designed it so that the same input produces the same outcome. This predictability builds confidence because believers no longer have to rely on chance, mood, or emotional highs. They can trust that obedience, understanding, and alignment will always produce fruit at the right time. When believers truly embrace the impartial nature of spiritual laws, they stop depending on personality, gifting, or spiritual charisma and start depending on truth. Growth becomes accessible, progress becomes measurable, results become repeatable. Spiritual life moves from mystery to clarity, not because God becomes smaller, but because His principles are finally being honored. And the moment a believer aligns with those principles, they step into a system that doesn't fail, where consistency is no longer rare, but natural. Many people assume that spiritual growth just happens with time. They believe that if they keep showing up, attending services, participating in activities, staying around long enough, maturity will naturally follow. But spiritual growth doesn't work that way. Time alone doesn't grow anyone. It only reveals what has been intentionally nurtured. Without deliberate effort guided by understanding, a person can remain at the same spiritual level for years while assuming they are growing simply because time has passed. Real growth starts with awareness. A believer has to recognize that maturity is something you build, not something you absorb by proximity. Spiritual capacity increases when truth is consistently learned, reflected on, and applied. When learning stops, growth slows. When practice is avoided, understanding stays theoretical. Growth requires responsibility because it involves choosing spiritual development over comfort, habit, and routine. Discipline is a key part of this process, not as punishment, but as structure. Structure creates consistency, and consistency builds strength. When spiritual habits are formed intentionally, they begin to shape character, thinking, and perspective. Without discipline, spiritual life becomes reactive, driven by moods and circumstances instead of truth. Intentional discipline keeps growth steady even when motivation comes and goes. Many believers feel stuck because they want transformation without participation. They long for change but resist the process that produces it. Growth often feels uncomfortable because it challenges familiar patterns, beliefs, and behaviors. But that discomfort isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that development is happening. When believers lean into the process instead of avoiding it, growth becomes visible through greater stability, clearer discernment, and lasting fruit. Spiritual growth also requires patience. Intentional effort doesn't create instant results, but it always produces progress. When commitment is sustained, growth compounds. Small, consistent choices eventually create depth. This is why short bursts of spiritual activity can't replace steady engagement. Maturity is built over time through faithful, ongoing application of truth. When growth becomes intentional, stagnation loses its grip. The believer takes ownership of their development instead of relying on external motivation or emotional highs. Understanding guides practice. Practice strengthens understanding, and maturity becomes evident. Spiritual life shifts from routine to real transformation, not because time passed, but because intention directed growth toward lasting change. Many people want visible change without first paying attention to what's happening on the inside. They focus on results, praying for breakthroughs, answers, and progress, while overlooking the inner alignment that actually produces those outcomes. In God's system, manifestation is never the starting point, it's always the result. Before anything shows up in the physical, something must first come into order in the spirit. When beliefs, values, actions, and understanding are out of sync with spiritual principles, results are delayed, not because God is unwilling, but because alignment is still incomplete. Alignment starts with agreement. It's not enough to agree with truth in theory. It has to be lived out practically. What a person believes should shape how they speak, act, and make decisions. When beliefs say one thing but behavior says another, spiritual flow is disrupted. The spirit realm responds to consistency. Alignment clears the pathway for God's influence to move freely. When alignment is missing, effort increases but results decrease. A lot of spiritual frustration actually comes from misalignment, not opposition. People spend time praying against obstacles that alignment would remove naturally. When internal order is corrected, external resistance often weakens on its own. Spiritual power flows through structure. Just like electricity needs proper wiring to function safely, spiritual manifestation requires correct alignment to move effectively. Without it, even sincere effort can produce very little. Alignment also involves obedience. Truth that is understood but not practiced doesn't produce results. Obedience puts belief into motion. It turns revelation into positioning. When a believer aligns their actions with what they know, they step into readiness, and readiness is what makes manifestation possible. God doesn't force outcomes, He responds to alignment. Timing is often connected to alignment as well. When things are properly ordered, timing begins to work in your favor. Delays aren't always rejection. Many times, they simply mean alignment is still forming. When alignment is complete, results don't have to be pushed, they flow naturally. Manifestation feels effortless because the foundation is already in place. When believers choose alignment over appearance, frustration begins to fade. They stop chasing results and start building structure. As alignment deepens, outcomes follow consistently. Breakthroughs stop feeling like rare surprises and start becoming expected results of a life that is properly ordered by truth.